when somebody does business internationally, it should consider that most, if not all countries, do tax their resident companies or residents on their worldwide income, and at the same time do tax every income that derives from their territory. Hence, if somebody is a resident of one state and derives income from another state, he has an important risk of double taxation. Now, Belgium prides itself to be one of the pioneers of cooperation in cooperating with China. And this cooperation started quite early because Belgium has had the tenacity of creating its own nuclear power plants. And being a very small country, we very rapidly were aware that the few power plants that we could establish in Belgium would not be sufficient to justify the investment, and hence we looked for markets elsewhere. And actually one market that Belgium was able to establish itself in order to build nuclear power plants was China, and we're talking about the 70s. At this stage, there was no treaty between Belgium and China, but because we were talking about a huge company that actually had as a client the government of China, there were some annexes to the contracts themselves that dealt with taxation and that avoided Tractable, which was the Belgian company at the time, to be doubly taxed once in China and a second time in Belgium. Now, in 1985, rapidly it was understood that we could not leave such a big advantage to big, huge companies that by the system that was applicable then were in fact the only companies that really could do business in China, because a small entrepreneur would not receive a specific tax regime for a smaller contract, and hence Belgium, who had the Kingdom of Belgium, who had this good relationship with the People's Republic of China, approached China in order to establish a double taxation treaty based mainly on the model that was made by the OECD, which is the Organization for Economical and Commercial Development, in order to avoid that an entrepreneur that from one country that would do business in the other would be taxed twice. Now, historically, one should understand that in 1985, the international business that was considered was mainly Belgian entrepreneurs that would do business in China. And in the articles related to the avoidance of double taxation, you will see that it is on a scale of issues, there are some derogations towards the model of the OECD, because China would not, and logically so, want to give the rights to Belgium to tax for matters that are related to China, or in a relationship that is not symmetrical, because at the time people considered that most investment would come from Belgium into China and not the contrary. In 1996, there was already an additional protocol. Some elements of the convention were modified, basically mainly because the Chinese tax system was changed between 1985 and 1996. And the second important reason was that in order to sustain the unbelievable economical growth that China had, Chinese banks, which were owned by the Chinese government, granted important loans to big Belgian companies that enabled them to buy goods from Chinese companies. Now, logically so, it was not considered appropriate for Belgium to withhold taxes on the interest that would be reimbursed to the Chinese government-owned banks, which is also something that has been modified by the additional protocol. I will shortly give the main explain the main articles of this double taxation treaty as it is since 1996. So it is not that much of an historical overview that I will give you, but considering the short time frame that I have and the big material that I will cover, I do apologize for it. So Article 7 is the basic law. Companies are taxed in their home country. So if a Belgian company buys goods in China and are able to sell them with a capital gain in Belgium without having established themselves in any way in China, there is no taxation in China. In the other direction, it is of course the same thing. The big exception, of course, is profits obtained through a permanent establishment in another country, which then are only taxed in that other country where the permanent establishment is established. So a permanent establishment basically is the fact of being permanently on the spot. If a Belgian company opens a bureau where all Chinese people can direct themselves towards the company in China, and where somebody is able to obligate the company in China itself, then there is profit obtained through this permanent establishment that should be taxed in China, and it's the same the other way around. Now, for reasons of limited liability, for reasons of clear view of what business creates what and so on, most companies do not use the system of permanent establishment, but create subsidiaries. So new companies, a Belgian company that would invest in China would create a Chinese company whose shares are owned by the Belgian company. This creates a limited liability for the activity in China and gives warrants the Belgian company that nothing that would happen in China would lead to any problems, direct problems for the Belgian company. The only risk taken by the Belgian companies are the shares. Hence, it is not that much Article 7 of the treaty that is important for the international business between parties, but Article 10, which is a quite important article, which states that dividends are only taxed in the state of the mother company. There is a but. The state of the daughter company, which means the state in which the dividends arise, is allowed to withhold up to 10%. So first you have corporate tax, which the daughter company obviously pays in the country in which it is established. Based on the netto that remains after having paid corporate tax, it can send the money home to its mother company through dividends. So these dividends are taxed in the country of the mother company, with the possibility for the country in which the subsidiary is a resident of to withhold a 10% withholding tax. Now, this but is mostly important for Belgian companies that invest in that create a Chinese subsidiary. Why? Because Belgian daughter companies that send dividends home to a Chinese company, Belgian internal law does not provide for withholding tax. So the possibility given by the treaty to Belgium to withhold the 10% has not been used by Belgium, which means that the dividend will flow back to China without any withholding tax. Now,